Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast in association with Laithwaite's Wine, the official wine partners of the ECB. Laithwaite's stop at nothing to bring you great wines and have done so for over 50 years. As part of our partnership, you are able to get 25% off 6 or more bottles when using the code Wisden at checkout. It is time for the 2023 World Cup. This is your comprehensive World Cup preview, 48 matches over 6.5 weeks, and something like 42 daily podcasts thrown in there as well. And like all good World Cup previews, we'll also be doing a bit on Middlesex's relegation from Division 1 that happened just after we recorded last week's show. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Mark Butcher, Phil Walker, and Joe Harman. We've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks and months talking about how this feels like an ending of sorts for World Cup cricket. As we know it, ODI cricket is likely to be pushed even further towards the margins in the next few years. The teams also feel very similar to how they looked like 4 years ago. And there are loads of players who almost certainly will be playing their last World Cups, which I feel almost elevates the narrative during the event. So many players and groups eyeing up that final, that farewell finale.
Yeah, I guess so. I would imagine that if you look back over quite a lot of World Cups, that you'd always have that sort of end point being that they're 4-year cycles. But it's more sharply in focus for England, perhaps because of the fact that they were champions in 2019, and this will most definitely be the last time we see more than half of that squad, you'd think. So yeah, I mean it's and also the last time we'll see a lot of players who kind of grew up on a diet of 50 over cricket. I mean, as you alluded to at the beginning there, the bilateral cricket in 50 over formats just seems off, doesn't it? I mean, it just seems very little excitement around it. There's plenty of excitement around a World Cup, of course, but for the sort of post-test matches or pre-test match build-ups during the course of the summer, a couple of ODIs just to fill in and to pay some bills just doesn't seem to capture the imagination in the way that perhaps it once did. So you're going to end up probably by the time we get to the next one, 2027, with a lot of players who perhaps don't play an enormous amount of 50 over cricket outside of those major tournaments. So it will be different. I think it's going to be an incredible spectacle, obviously, being in India. The love of 50 over cricket has not diluted one bit there. And they will be favourites to win it at home. And there are probably another 5 teams that you would put in the category of being capable of perhaps stopping them from doing that, of which one of them is England.
Phil, we spent the morning watching reruns of the 1996 World Cup semi-final and the 1992 final. Was ODI cricket just more fun back then?
When the ball goes up and you're not sure if various sort of creaking late 30-somethings are going to get there or not, because they might have been doing panto over the winter or whatever it was. There's definitely a more sort of human element to it back in the day.
It was just a bit more random.
Good cricketers are good cricketers, though. And for all that there's something sort of sepia tinted about it. There's still some quality back there, but sure, there's a homogenous nature to a lot of white ball cricket now because of the power of it. Physical developments. Bats have changed the game as well. I was just watching Cronje bat in the 99 semi-final, which we may or may not be mentioning later on in the show. And he's got this tiny little toothpick. The game is about power now more than ever before, but the reason why I'm looking forward to this tournament is because I've not paid much attention to 50 over cricket in the last 4 years, in truth, really. 20 over cricket is your currency, it's your staple now. I'm looking forward to 20 over cricket with a little bit more refinement, a little bit more ebb and flow and all the rest of it. And it'd be interesting to see how that does play out. If actually I've been so kind of conditioned now by immediate gratification that those middle overs, even though they've evolved in recent years, but it'd be interesting to see if I do feel 100 overs is too many. I don't know. At the moment, I'm thinking I want it. I really, really want it.
Well, not just.
But we shall see.
It's not just you. It's a lot of the players as well, right? Have they been conditioned to expect too much? And
Stokes said it, didn't he?
Be interesting to Stokes say I'd forgotten it was this long. They had this long to bat an ODI, and it'll be interesting to. I wouldn't be surprised if we get quite a lot of lowish scores early in the tournament with teams going out a little bit too hard and the expectation that you need to be scoring 350 plus. Whereas actually often in World Cups we find that the scores aren't quite as high as they are in bilateral series. That maybe a bit of added pressure puts on a bit of puts on sort of the brakes on batters to an extent, and also pitches do start to get a bit tired as the tournament goes on as well.
Just on that 1996 World Cup semi-final, so Warne took 4 for 30 odd, but didn't get through his 10 overs because Australia gave 2 overs to the part-time leg spin of Stuart Law, and in the highlights, the only 2 deliveries that he bowled didn't come that close to even pitching. So times have changed, and Warne batted 5 in the 96 final.
And Courtney Brown opened the batting for the West Indies in the World Cup.
With Chanderpaul.
With Chanderpaul as well. Yes. Different times in many respects. Many respects.
Do you think the World Cup this time, for me at least, World Cup memories really, really stick out. Early World Cup memories from 1999, 2003 in particular, really stick out for me. Do you think it still does have that power for the younger generation of cricket fans? But now is there just too much cricket that is similar to it that it might not stand out as much?
Go on.
I think also everything is clipped up in a way. It's quite hard. There is so much stuff out there. It's quite hard for things to stand out in the same way. But I do think 50 over World Cups, certainly in my head, linger much longer than T20 World Cups or any T20 matches. So yeah, I still think it does have the capacity to do that. The problem that we might have is that I think people are less willing to accept a rubbish match because we've been conditioned to T20 and the fact it's over in 3 hours. A bad T20, at least it's done quickly. A bad 50 over game can go on for a very long time. And I think we are, not just fans, but like as journalists as well, we aren't really conditioned to accept that in the same way. So we got, oh God, this is. But that's what a lot of ODIs have always been.
Us, eh?
But they have been. Yeah. I mean, I still, and this is going to sound sacrilegious, but I still reckon that World Cup final was one of the worst games of cricket I've ever seen until the last.
I said something similar the other week. It was
absolute shocker. I mean, the pitch was horrendous. Here we go again. But it was, Colin de Granholm sort of. What did he get? 2 for 20 or something? It was unplayable.
1 for 27, I think.
Right. Unplayable against the fastest scoring one day outfit that had ever been. Couldn't hit him off the square. It was horrific. And somehow, due to the extraordinary brilliance of Buttler and Stokes, England kind of stayed alive. They still shouldn't have won the game. Shouldn't have got close to 241. The catch, or the catch that wasn't when Bolt stood on the boundary and the ricochet and whatever meant that England got to 241. They had to play out of their boots to get 241, and then of course, the rest is history. But we saw the cup final the other week. Well done the Foxes, by the way. The thing about 50 over cricket that is not allowed or doesn't come about very often in T20 cricket is that you can have a stinker. You can have a stinker and come back from it, which is the added narrative of the game being that much longer. But I also think that we just watched the highlights there of the 99 World Cup final, the classic run out finish with South Africa and Australia. And when you condense a 50 over game down into highlights like that, it works. It was still as exciting and as baffling watching it just now as it was watching it live all the way back in '99. So, look, I think it has its place. I think that particularly the generation of, I remember as a youngster, anything that had World Cup written in it, didn't matter what sport it was, I loved it. So it's kind of you have to rather than looking at it through sort of jaded. We watch cricket every day type eyes. You think about it from the point of view of people who kind of look forward to this once every 4 years and we're really looking forward to England defending their title. And I think you've got what promises to be a really excellent tournament.
Yeah, and outside of Test cricket, it's defined the stories of 3 South Asian countries from India in '83 to 2011. Obviously, Sri Lanka '96, Pakistan '92. Their cricket is indelibly identifiable to those sort of touchstones. Less so over here, probably less over here than anywhere else in the world because we had this peculiar standoffish relationship with it for ages anyway, and obviously kept losing finals and all the rest of it. Australia used to dominate it. They dominated a lot of things, but their white ball domination was absolutely essential to their overall sense of preeminence and all the rest of it. It's obviously been buffeted and beaten up by other more lucrative and more powerful formats, but it's still massively, as Mark says, has its value. It's still the one they want to win, right? And if you take, say, Kohli as an example, who, going back to 2011, he was like a rookie pup kid, stuck Tendulkar on his shoulders, knew exactly what line he was going to say because he'd planned it, no doubt, a few days beforehand. He's been carrying us on his shoulders for 20 years. It's about time we carried him. Since that moment, Kohli's been looking for the completeness to say that this is his era. I am the Sachin of now. And no amount of IPL runs, and to be honest, no amount of Test match hundreds is going to compare to if he is the star in the next 2 months and he lifts the thing to complete his story. And no other option is out there for Kohli to put that final stamp on his greatness. And so that's still what's at stake. We can talk about the format a lot with good reason, but that's still what's at stake. It's still the one they want to win.
Joe, how do you think England will do? Watching the Steamers struggle through the heat this morning did make me worry a little bit. It's going to be a long tournament.
Yeah. Well, it is a long tournament, undeniably a long tournament. They've got quite a lot of seamers, so I guess that should help.
Yeah.
I think they'll go well. I think I'd be surprised if they don't get to a semi-final. And if they do, then who knows? I think India do feel a nudge ahead of the rest, but not by a massive margin. And we know they've got a tendency to kind of implode in major tournaments over the last decade, which makes it all the more exciting that however well they start, even if they go 9 out of 9 and they cruise through to the semis, there will still be that bit, certainly among Indian fans, and the rest of the fans will be sort of fingers crossed that they could still blow it despite being such a good side. I think England, I think New Zealand will be a really tough game. New Zealand are very, very good in group stages of World Cups. I think they've got to, wrote down the stat earlier, only twice in the last 8 tournaments they failed to make it to at least the semi-finals.
Oh, wow.
And, I would say this side doesn't look quite as good as the sides of the last 2 World Cups, but it's not far off. So, England could very well lose their first game. I don't think that would be a huge shock. But if they do, I still wouldn't say that's going to end their chances of getting to the semis or even be like a major crisis. But I think that'll be a really, really tight game.
It's a strange format, really. It has clarity because, a child can understand it, but 40% of the teams go through to the last 3 days of a tournament that lasts about 45 days, right? So there's going to be a lot of us sitting around these straining to concoct a narrative, whereas in truth, just under half of the teams are going to qualify for a showdown, right? As Swan wrote about Kevin O'Brien, that good line, one day someone just wakes up and has the best day of their lives, and that could happen to any team at any point. So there's a weird kind of arbitrary element to it as well, I think.
And it's also, they've stuck to that tradition that, first plays 4th, second plays 3rd. There's no advantage to finishing first other than you play, in theory, the weaker team. It's not like the IPL where the team who finishes first has to play a game fewer. So really, it's when you get into semi-finals, all bets are off, forget what's gone. And that's an exciting part of it. The fear is that the top 4, and I hope this won't happen because I think it's going to be quite an even tournament, but 4 teams get away and you end up having quite a lot of dead rubbers towards the end of the group phase. That would be a shame, particularly if there's some rain around. We might struggle for a bit of content on some of those daily shows.
I'm sure we'll get through it.
Not a chance.
I flip-flop a bit on that point because we've talked about it before on this show, I think, and I sort of made a point a few weeks ago thinking, well, Indian conditions might level the playing field a little bit because the so-called slightly lesser nations, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc., it will be neutralised a bit because they'll be more comfortable in those conditions, say, than when they were playing 4 years ago. That said, when you run through the squads and when a couple of teams have really been hit hard by injuries where their resources are maybe not quite as deep as other teams, it does, nearer to the start of the tournament, that fear becomes more pronounced for me that we're going to have quite a lot of games that are lacking a bit of context.
I guess what could happen is
This is very much a Monday afternoon show, isn't it?
Come
on. Sorry.
When are we opening the wine? I think that's...
it's on its way. I think teams like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Afghanistan, there will be some pitches that particularly suit them. So, for example, England play Bangladesh and Sri Lanka on what are supposed to be pretty quick wickets. But they've got Afghanistan at Delhi, which in recent years has been very spin-friendly. That is more of a banana skin than I think it would have been 4 years ago, even without taking into account that Afghanistan are a stronger side than they were. And also, in terms of, to your point about how 4 teams might run away with it, it only takes 2 teams to sort of stutter at this 2 of the, I guess, top 6. to stutter early on to make the whole tournament really interesting. And
it's what happened in 2019,
exactly,
wasn't it? When England sort of
exactly.
unexpectedly lost to Sri Lanka. What was the other game? And then
suddenly
they ended up having 3 knockout games in a row, didn't they? To get to the final. So it can happen, and simply because you've got the idea of myriad different conditions. There is the threat that there might be some rain around. We're still sort of coming towards the back end of the rainy season out there. That anything could potentially happen. You'd still think that over the course of the 8 games that each team are going to play, that the best ones is it 8 or is it 9? It's 9, isn't it? The best 4 teams will come through in the end, because it's it takes a lot of upsets for India to say not to make it to the semi-finals. That would be utterly ridiculous. But so, and the format has basically been put together in order to try and ensure that those best teams get through, haven't they? You don't have to qualify in a group stage. You don't have the potential banana skin of losing a game and then having one washed out, and suddenly one of your big teams is gone. They're in, and all they have to do is kind of play relatively well, and they should make it through to the semis.
And what I'm saying is, Pakistan almost always make these tournaments entertaining themselves. Like they inject jeopardy into their own games.
Well, they've got the second game against Netherlands.
Yeah, I mean,
we've all been talking them up. Clearly, they lose to Netherlands in their first game and then fight their way back to get to the semis.
Yeah.
Just on England, worth saying that England's warm-up game today against Bangladesh is in Guwahati, which is a good few thousand kilometres away from where they'll be playing in 3 days' time in the tournament opener against New Zealand. Charlie asks, how will England select their team based on different venues? Sort of trying to work out what the England team is going to be. Bairstow, Milan, Root, Stokes, Butler, Livingston locked in top 6. And then are we thinking Moeen at 7, Wokes, Rashid, Wood +1? Or do we think it's Moeen / Curran and then a third seamer or 4-seamer if Curran plays?
So that being your point of difference, whether they play the extra left armour or the second spinner.
Yeah.
In my head, it's Moeen or Curran, and they play the extra frontline seamer. I'm pretty sure will be Topley at this stage. But then I could absolutely see why you want to get Curran in your side in a World Cup. It's not a different format, but not so long ago that he absolutely dominated that T20 World Cup. But he still doesn't feel like a frontline seamer, particularly in 50-over cricket. He just doesn't. So I think they would feel like their bowling's a little bit light if they go with Livingston, Moeen and Curran and have a seamer fewer.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think watching Sam bowl obviously in T20 the batters are kind of like that. Everyone's a coconut. 4s and 6s are the first point of thought. But if you've got to get people out when they're not doing that, when they're quite happy to tick along at 7s and 8s. Not take massive risks, he then becomes less potent as somebody that might remove people in the middle part of an innings. He'll still be brilliant at the death, but I think it'll come down. Livingston is an interesting one because he's kind of not really a frontline bowler. You can't really say that he's going to be a 10 over bowler in there. But they might think that they can get away with stacking the batting as hard as they possibly can, which might leave Moeen on the outside. So that England can get the requisite amount of seam bowling into the team, and so you've got 3. If the conditions are really sort of going to turn, then obviously Moeen comes back into it. But you've always got 3 spin options in the team anyway, and Rashid, Root, and Livingston.
It will obviously pitches, of course, but also opposition as well. We saw Bangladesh's top order. Mahedi played nicely, but the top order struggled a bit against Topley, who was digging it in halfway down. So they may just look as well at who they're coming up against, right?
So you think maybe get Atkinson in for that game and get an extra quick in as well?
Well, I saw him. His figures didn't reflect it, but I saw him bowl again today. He looks like the kind of bowler that will cause problems to certain players, right? He bowls almost automatically back of a length. And we're talking about what kind of pitches you're going to get. I think there's a question actually on Twitter. If you look at the average first innings scores across the board, really, at the venues, they're pretty low. They are pretty low over the last few years. You take records back to 2016. One of your lads has been doing some research on that. So bowlers are massively in the game here. So conversely, perhaps England might think about stacking the batting. Personally, I would lean towards Curran because I just think he knows his game inside out in those conditions. I would lean towards him, I think.
So Curran over Moeen?
I think so, yeah. Because as Mark says, Root is Moeen's not necessarily a 10 overs bowler anyway, right? because he's up and down and can get whacked. I think between Adil, Livingston, and Root against New Zealand, my instinct is that they might lean towards Curran. But,
Moen's batting,
rubbish.
unless I've forgotten some 50 over knocks, which is very possible over the last couple of years. I can't remember him playing a 50 over knock of note for quite a while.
I can't remember when it was. But
Can anyone remember any 50 over
I can't remember
cricket?
when it was, but I remember tweeting that he reached 50 for the first time since he got 100 at Bristol in 2017.
Against West Indies, yeah.
So he has done that once at least in the last year.
And he probably hasn't had a huge amount of opportunity. You know, he's been lower down the order. But it feels more like you'll get a cameo out of him. I don't have much faith in a sort of knock of substance from Moen in the way that I did 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think England's chances are going to hinge on who sees off the run chase right at the death through England's middle order necessarily. But I would always prefer Curran to Moen when the pressure is really on. Moen is a joy, but he's the least clutch run chase ISA I've ever seen.
Yeah, is it how they've used him recently? They've actually bumped him up the order, so because you give him a free hit
to compensate,
basically.
for that fact. Yeah, whereas Curran's just got ice through his veins.
And I think, by the way, it was significant that Livingston had that good a series against New Zealand, coming in different scenarios. Actually, because we just hadn't really seen it in any form of cricket, because he only plays T20 cricket.
He's the real mystery and potentially the key man really in the whole setup for England, because some decent fast bowlers out there. Certain occasions, England are going to be 3 down for not very many. And then Livingston at 6 suddenly looks like a place or two too high. That said, he might pull it off. Yeah. He's the biggest mystery of them all for me.
Just on where the World Cup is, obviously it's in India. In 2011, when India hosted it, they won it. In 2015, when Australia hosted it, they won it. In 2019, when England hosted it, they won it. In 2011, 3 Asian sides made the semi-finals. It's interesting, comparing World Cups to World Cups. In 2019, the spinners were generally pretty quiet. No one took more than 12 wickets that Chahal took. And in 2011, 5 of the top 7 wicket takers were spinners. But Butch, you said before we were recording that the World Cup's being played in a different time of year to when it was in 2011, October, November compared to March, April. So do you think that means that the pitches might not be quite as spin-friendly as we've all been making out for the last 4 years?
You would imagine so. I mean, the interesting thing is, I'm sort of rewinding to 2019 here, forgive me, which is slightly off point, but not necessarily, was that England had kind of been looking to try and track down 450, 500 playing at bilateral 50 over games in the run up to that World Cup. Then the World Cup comes along and suddenly the decks are completely different. They're struggling to make 300 all the time. You just mentioned the overall scores at the venues for the World Cup. They're sort of they're mid 250s. They're kind of like 1999 World Cup type scores with butt clenching run chases and that type of thing. And I tend to think that it will be similar. I don't think that we're going to see sort of the bat dominate the ball to the degree that we've come to be used to in bilateral series. And I think that the quality of bearing in mind that the teams can put them out on the park, that the quality of fast bowling will kind of temper some of that sort of excessive bloated run scoring. And therefore sort of like your spin bowlers are going to be a little bit more like they were back in the days of Warne and Sacklein. And you'd have one guy who was your absolute go-to control middle overs, take wickets in the middle overs guys, and the rest of it would be sort of heavy seam bowling. And until we get sort of like towards the back end perhaps, and venues have been used a bit more and the weather settles down a little bit, I think that'll be pretty much the way that it goes. And in that case, you look at sort of what India have up in their locker in terms of quick bowlers, with Bumrah being back, Shami, Siraj, the Thakur conundrum for them as whether he gets in as an all-rounder, etc., etc. They've got that covered. South Africa look pretty good despite losing Nortje. Australia's quicks are their test match bowling attack. England look pretty well endowed in that measure as well, as do New Zealand. I mean, New Zealand attack is fantastic. And they've been relatively battle hardened with with a series recently in Pakistan, albeit with a slightly second string team. So the teams are going to go out there with looking to take wickets with heavy seam bowling, I reckon. And those guys, I think, are going to be very successful in trying to do so.
Right. So who are we choosing as the 4 semi-finalists? Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, you just want 4 teams. You're not saying beyond that.
4 teams, and then depending on what you say.
Okay, so India, England, Pakistan, and then the fourth, it does feel very much up for grabs. I've gone for New Zealand, not because I think they're the strongest of the rest of the sides, just because they usually get there, and they're still pretty strong. They're still a solid side. So just edging out South Africa and Australia for that fourth slot, I think.
You said earlier that you didn't think New Zealand were quite as strong as they were 4 years ago. But I think they might be as strong. Like, they've got someone like Conway's in now, and Phillips is in. Latham's a better ODI player than he was in 2019. And
Mitchell.
The bowling, and Mitchell.
Mitchell's got a great record. Yeah, I don't think there's much in it. I think compare Kane Williamson to 2019 when he was the player of the tournament in unbelievable form, and now we come into it and he's kind of a bit crocked. We don't know quite when he's going to be able to play. He won't play against England. That is a huge drop off for their best player, who's absolutely crucial to them. I suppose Trent Bolt, the way he's come back has slightly surprised me. He looks as good as he's ever done, whereas actually in terms of age, you thought he might have dropped off a bit, but he hasn't. And that seems, Butch says they're a really good attack. They are in certain conditions. I do think on flatter pitches, on some of the smaller grounds, they might struggle. Ferguson can look very dangerous at times, can also look very, very hissable. Southey, similar. And they don't have a world-class spinner, although they haven't had one since Vittori, which is a while ago anyway. But Sodi's good bowler, Santa's steady, but they haven't got someone who's going to rip through a lineup. So I think, I think they're solid. I think they've got a really good lineup, but it's not a lineup that scares you in the way that some other sides do, I think.
Phil, who are your four?
I've gone for Australia instead of New Zealand, and the other three that Joe mentioned, so India, England, Pakistan.
On Pakistan, a few weeks ago, we were all saying it's going to be a Pakistan-India final ever, but ever since we said that Pakistan have had a turbulent few weeks. Naseem Shah, he's out injured. The batting doesn't look quite as reliable as it was looking. Their form's dropped off a little bit. Saud Shakil, England fans will know because he batted for ages in the Test series there last year, but he's sort of come from nowhere, and he might be like a really pivotal game changer for them.
And yeah, his record in white ball cricket's not great. There's all kinds of precarity around Pakistan. The loss of Naseem Shah, described by Sean Tate, who was Pakistan's bowling coach for a time, as the best young bowler he'd ever seen in our magazine a couple of months ago. Loss of him is massive, for sure. But Haris Rauf is fit. Shaheen Afridi is fit. Hassan Ali is fit as well. So that's a pretty serious frontline three. But it's hard to judge it. And if one were to go down in the top three, say, Fakhar Zaman, Imam ul Haq, been prolific openers now for 4 years. Their records are outstanding for 4 years. And obviously Bubba is your diamond at 3. But the middle order is a problem, and the spin department is a bit of a problem as well. Shadab Khan is probably your frontline leggy. Mohammad Wasim is a useful cricketer, but there's not a massive amount there in that middle order, both in the spin department and the batting lineup is hard to judge. But then this is also Pakistan, right? And their record has been superb over the last couple of years. The Asia Cup seemed to come at the wrong time for them, and it seemed to destabilise them a little bit. I've put them in there because I put them in there in the magazine, but the magazine went to print, and I wrote the thing up sort of 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah. Making these kinds of calls are very difficult because momentum plays its part, and injuries really, really do hit hard. I've had a feeling for Australia, just because I tend to, and because I thought Travis Head could have been the batter of the tournament. His record over the last 2 years in white ball cricket is absolutely ridiculous. Opening the batting, hitting at 120 and averaging over 60. And he could have been the batter of the tournament. But then his hand got smashed up. So he's in the squad, but unlikely to play for the first few weeks. So there's... And teams have been hit quite hard with injuries, right? Norkia's gone, as Mark says, but Sri Lanka have lost Hasranga and Chamira as well. Probably their two most complete bowlers. So there's been... People have fallen all over the place. So it's become very, very hard to predict this thing. Even harder, more of a mug's game than it normally is.
I guess for me, obviously, we don't know quite how prominent a role spin will have in the tournament, but that is an area where Pakistan are just much weaker than where they have been historically. I mean, Shadab Khan, great cricketer, but he's got really quite an ordinary recent record.
I think Osama Mir is the guy for them. I kept an eye on him watched him during the PSL last February, March. and then he had a really good 100 for the Manchester Originals with bat and with the ball. Shadab's been bowling kind of hit me's for a long time now. Really, just sort of like lost all of his spite, and it just seems to go out the park every time he lets it go. So I think they might have to be a little bit smart. I'd play Mohamed Wasim and play Osama Mir if they're going to go for a double spin. And I'm still not sure. I'm not 100% sure about Haris Rauf's fitness for them. I think he tear an intercostal, so he's in the squad, but I'm not sure how ready he is going to be. And that's huge. Obviously, they lost Naseem Shah. Shaheen doesn't go so well at the end of the innings anymore. And so it was sort of Naseem, Haris Rauf would be their guys at the back end. Hassan Ali more with the new ball. So they feel a little bit short of what you'd normally expect from Pakistan, where they might have 3 go-to guys to kind of hit you at the back end of an innings. And with the batting, who knows? Babar will score a mountain of runs. Whether Babar and Rizwan will do it at a rate that kind of allows them to put teams under pressure and win games is another thing altogether. And having said all of this, that means they're going to get through without without no shadow of a doubt. It will look absolutely hopeless, and somehow they'll make it through to the semi-finals.
So just under 60% of all the runs scored for Pakistan since the end of the last World Cup have come from that top 3, the 2 lefties and Babar. So it speaks of their quality, but it also speaks of the not dearth, but the question marks against who's following after that. Mo Rizwan will probably bat 4, could have a really good tournament. Equally was out the team a year or so ago. So it's hard to make that call with any surety, but then that's Pakistan for you.
But who are your 4 semi-finalists?
Well, I keep changing now. I mean, England and India are kind of basically baked in. Australia's batting looks a little bit underwhelming to me, so I'm gonna miss them out. New Zealand I like. And then it's between Pakistan and South Africa for the last one. Massive fan of Pakistan cricket, obviously, and so therefore I'm going to change my mind, and I'm going to have them going through, because I think South Africa, looking at them, they've got this South African team, right, with the likes of Klaasen, who's just having the most extraordinary 18 months or so. Markram and Miller, those 3 sort of in the middle order for them are very, very dangerous. You've got all-rounders like Marco Jansen. They've kind of got depth in a way through the middle and lower order that they've not had before.
Yeah, that's very true.
I guess it's the sort of the Bavuma, whether Hendricks goes out there, how Quentin de Kock's going to go in his last tournament. He's sort of given up all the other types of cricket there are on there, so it's his last hurrah as well.
Bavuma's had a great run in as well, hasn't
exactly,
he?
terrific, yeah.
Really, unbelievable
very good form. I mean, I saw him make a brilliant 100 against England back in, it would have been January or December. Either at the beginning of this year or at the end of last, and I don't recall ever seeing him play as well as that.
Yeah.
So he's in terrific nick. But it's it's South Africa on the same hand that you would say that Pakistan somehow will muddle through and find a way to get through against all of the available odds. South Africa will look as though they're completely odds on, because they've got a fabulous team with all sorts of players in form. And find a way to mess it up. And so on that score, I'm going to go Pakistan over South Africa, which is a very late change.
Yeah, I think with South Africa, that they are relying so much on Jansen in particular, who just hasn't played that much ODI cricket. He's batting at 7, which feels maybe one spot too high. And he's also probably going to have to do quite a lot of bowling. And Markram's going to probably have to do a lot of bowling. And Markram's just such a weird player in that he looks like he should be the perfect ODI batter, but before this year had literally never scored an ODI 100. And then he's done really well recently, but that's on the high veld in South Africa, where the conditions are totally opposite to what you're going to get in the World Cup. So I think a lot is resting on players who I don't think you can completely bank on.
Nortje is a huge loss for them. If you say
huge
to have
loss.
Nortje and Rabada as your new ball player, you're going to have sides, kind of really good sides, 30 for 3, like fairly frequently, and then you can beat anyone really. And I just don't know if that's going to happen now. And Geely's good on his day, but takes wickets, but leaks a few as well. Not necessarily as reliable. I think for me that's got South Africa have gone for kind of 4th or 5th to 6th or 7th based on Nortje not being available.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Gerald Coetzee goes. The young quick, he's young, angry, bowls 90 miles per hour. I think he'd be quite interesting.
Just newsflash: Trent Bolt's bowling in the warm up against Africa and is utterly unplayable.
Around corners,
Yeah, he's looking very, very good. Just in Australia, so I think my top 4 are New Zealand, India, England, Australia, and it was difficult choosing between Australia, Pakistan, and New Zealand. I think Australia are just quite interesting. Very experienced, still a lot of 2015 World Cup winners in there. But then you've got Pat Cummins is very inexperienced as a white ball captain, and he's sort of going in blind. Almost, he's played so little ODI cricket recently. Labuschagne's in good form, but he's hardly a like-for-like replacement for Travis Head. And I've seen some chat in Australia that some people want Sean Abbott to come in at 8 to bolster the batting in for Hazelwood, which Sean Abbott's a brilliant cricketer, but that is weakening the bowling attack, and they also only have one properly specialist spinner in the squad in Adam Zampa, so it doesn't really feel like they can be as flexible as other sides might be in response to different conditions.
They don't feel that well set up for a World Cup in India as a side in terms of their balance of the side, but I still think you can't rule them out. I mean, I haven't got them in my 4, but I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if they get to a World Cup final. I mean, they look in a lot better shape for this World Cup than they did for the T20 World Cup, which they went on to win. So, they've definitely got it in their locker to make us all look a bit silly.
Definitely.
I think on flat roads, I wouldn't fancy Australia, but I'm not sure it's going to be like that across the course of the tournament. And then you're going to need canny cricketers, slow heartbeat cricketers, and having Smith and Labuschagne, they're not going to go at a mad rate, of course, but you'd fancy them if you're chasing 250 under lights somewhere and it's swinging around a little bit, which I think a lot of the games are going to look like.
And they've actually got, probably for the first time in a while, like a really good group of seam bowling all-rounders in Marsh, Green and Stoinis as well. Stoinis has actually been bowling really well recently. You'll know by now that in the build-up to the World Cup, we're looking back at vintage moments of 50-over World Cups gone by, and what better way to do this than with Laithwaite's wine and trying to pair some of our favourite moments with some of their stunning wines. So for our final...
Shall I do the noise while you're talking?
Go for it. For our final vintage moment, we're looking back at the 99 World Cup semi-final between Australia and South Africa, widely regarded as one of the greatest World Cup matches of all time, with Alan Donald famously getting run out with the scores level to send Australia to the final. The wine we are pairing this with is The Escapist. The magician behind The Escapist is one of South Africa's best kept secrets. He has access to some of the very best vineyards in the Western Cape, a luxury which allowed him to conjure up this breathtaking Sauvignon Blanc. These Atlantic-cooled sites ripen grapes to perfection under the bright Cape sun, whilst locking in freshness, the kind of cut grass-scented, flavoursome treat that begs to be sipped from an ice-cool glass.
Might taste. I actually salivated when I smelt that for the first time.
Hair of the dog.
Razor blades. No, it's damn good.
We were talking about this game earlier, but you just, despite obviously having seen this game many times before, you just couldn't believe what was happening at the end.
It. Well, I mean, Warren for a start bowls magnificently. I mean, it's the deliveries that he gets rid of Cronje with, Herschel Gibbs with, Jacques Callis with, are just textbook Warren. Like real slow, heavy drift, hard leg breaks, unplayable stuff. So he kind of keeps them in it. And then, South Africa are dead and buried. And we were talking about this before we went out. We're talking about the difference in white ball cricket ever since the advent of T20 cricket. And my feeling is that more than the bats changing and all the rest of it is the ability and the intent of players to hit boundaries, to be able to hit sixes from numbers 1 to 11. Whereas in the old days, as it was back then in that semi-final, Lance Klusener was the one guy who could kind of hit the ball out of the park or find the boundary at will. Whereas in the modern game, because of T20, because of the necessity to be able to score at 12s, 16s, whatever it might be, that players are just much, much better at. They practice it. They, all of their training is based around sort of power and being able to hit the ball out of the park in a way that it wasn't back then. So Klusener is the one guy for South Africa. He comes in, he gets them basically last over. What do they need of the last over? They need 9. 9 off the last. He's got Alan Donald at the other end. First 2 balls from my old opening bowling partner for South Melbourne, Damien Fleming, 4-4, right? They need 1 from 4 deliveries. And I couldn't remember. I actually forgot that they had so many balls left. So Donald almost gets run out backing up off the third ball. And then the fourth ball, that's, the classic. The Yorker goes in. Klusner just decides he's going to run. It was just completely headless. Donald thinks, well, that's no good, drops his bat, and ends up getting run out by Miles Q. Huge, wild celebrations from Australia. And they still had 2 balls to go. It's just completely mad. And, the South Africa's kind of reputation as chokers was cemented at that point, and they've done absolutely nothing since to make us think that it's not true, unfortunately. But that was, just the most harebrained piece of thinking. The lack of kind of clarity of thought, the lack of that sort of pressure, I guess. And this is where, again, T20 has changed the game.
But again,
people are much cooler about any sort of run chase.
Exactly, you wouldn't have that now.
No.
You'd just go fine.
It's all right, but you think back to the amount of times guys will smoke the ball out and bat him with the tail end, will crash the ball out to the boundary and just stand there and go, it's all right, I'll let the next one for 6. That type of cool-headedness under fire, and it made for great drama. The competence of the modern day has rather ruined that sort of moment, I reckon.
Yeah.
I mean, we were genuinely saying this earlier, that part of what made ODI cricket so watchable was that it was much less predictable, I guess.
It's probably worth reflecting as well, because especially for younger listeners who might know Klusner for that moment, but not necessarily know much about what he did for the rest of that World Cup, because he was stunningly brilliant. So he's player of the tournament, batting in a way that we hadn't really seen in 50-over cricket before. Took a bunch of wickets as well, and it's kind of that tragic comic ending that he's known for from that World Cup. But he was playing just a different type of cricket to pretty much everyone else in that tournament.
And also, just watching the highlights of that earlier today, there was so much good cricket in that match that I just completely forgotten. So Pollock takes 5 for nothing and whacks a really important quick 20-odd. And Donald took an amazing 4 for, like two brilliant Yorkers, clean bowled. So maybe unlike the 2019 World Cup final, a really close game that was actually really good before it as well.
There was some good stuff in it.
I think Mark obviously spoke about it, but I think the Warren ball to Herschel Gibbs it's the other ball of the century.
Yeah.
It's as good, if not better, because he's playing against a player who's well informed. They're 50 for 0, right? Not even looking like a chase is even odd. It's we'll pack up and go home. And Warren obviously did what he did, but Gibbs is playing him through wide-ish mid-wicket as it dips, and then just obviously rags right past him, and that got everything going. And that Warren thing of never being beaten, but I don't think anyone else in that side genuinely thought they could pull that one out. It's a small ground, Edgbaston. They've got 200 and not many. 50 for 0. Warren changes the whole show.
And in 4 World Cup semi-final, final appearances, he took 3 4-fers, I think. So
he's had quite a quiet tournament up until then as well, yeah. So Australia sort of spluttered through it.
So they lost to New Zealand, didn't they?
Yeah.
In the group
Roger
stage.
Twos hit the winning rounds. I think.
Roger 2. Was that Edgbaston?
Got 100. I think it was Edgbaston. Yeah, you're right.
South Africa being the best side in that, or probably were the best side in that tournament, really.
Yeah,
and then blew it.
As a reminder, if you enjoy the sound of any of the wines we have drunk across the podcast over the last 4 weeks, they are available at Laithwaite's, and don't forget your 25% off when you buy 6 or more bottles with the code Wisden at checkout. Next up, not long after the World Cup, England will be heading back to India for a 5-test series. Experienced Travel Group are offering tailored tours out there. Earlier on, I spoke to Nick from Experienced Travel Group about what they have on offer. Experienced Travel Group are putting together a dream trip to India alongside England's test series there in early 2024. I'm joined by Nick from ETG, who will tell us all about it. Nick, for someone who's never watched test cricket in India, what should they expect from this trip?
Good question. I mean, I think probably the obvious thing is that passion. It's very much a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. That it is a religion out there. The knowledge is exceptional. The amount that people want to kind of talk to you about it, discover it. Whether cricket's on or not, they'll stop you in the street. They'll ask you. They'll tend to know more than you know about random county cricket players, which is all sort of part of the fun. They're up for a bit of banter, and so watching cricket there, just you get a level of passion that you just don't really get kind of elsewhere. And then you combine that with the the heritage, the history, the amazing food, the brilliant people, the architecture. It's just such a special place to watch cricket.
No, that sounds pretty good to me. In terms of what ETG offer compared to other touring companies, you can tailor the trip to exactly what you want, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, we're first and foremost a company that does immersive holidays with give back across South and Southeast Asia. So that's our kind of day job, so to speak. And that is all about getting you under the skin of destinations and putting you at the heart of the adventure. So yeah, everything we do is kind of tailor made. And with the cricket, I'd say we're different to a lot of what the other companies do, the sort of the Barmy Army or the kind of the group sort of trips, is that we're first and foremost, we're about that kind of immersive nature of India with the cricket as an add-on. So we will have a conversation with you, we'll work out what it is that you want to do, how long you want to go to the cricket, the sort of accommodation you want to have while you're there, and then what you want to combine that with, depending on which kind of venue you go with, and build that package completely from scratch. And then when you're there, it will just be you. You'll make sure you have kind of private transfers, and you've got that kind of personalised sort of level of support throughout.
And you can choose to go to one test in particular rather than it's not a 2-month trip.
No, absolutely. So I mean, typically people are going for sort of 2 or 3 weeks, but that you choose how long you want to go for, and yeah, you tend to be one test plus a tour. If you do want to combine a couple of tests, then we can look at that. But yeah, it's all about how much you want to go for, and likewise, you don't necessarily have to go for all of the days. So if you just want to do a couple of days, that's great. Is whatever works for you, really.
There'll be some people listening to this who've been to India before. So what venues would you recommend for someone going to India for the first time versus someone who might have been to India a lot before?
Yeah, well, I think as we would always say, it's all about what works for you, and different people want different things. I think there's obviously a bit. I think we, like everyone else, were expecting one of the big hitters to be in. So we were a bit surprised that there was no Mumbai or Calcutta or Delhi or Chennai. I was particularly excited actually to try and weave a Calcutta trip in. So that was surprising, and they've replaced that with the slightly more obscure sort of venues, and particularly the second, third, and fourth tests. They're quite difficult to kind of get to. So that's Visakhapatnam, Rajkot, and Ranchi. They're quite difficult to get to. There's not a lot, there on offer. They're slightly nondescript places. And Rajkot is actually in Gujarat, which is a dry state. So we're basically not really focusing on them. The second test a little bit because it works quite well with the first test. But what we're really looking at are the first and the fifth. So Hyderabad is the first test, and that's just a brilliant gateway for India. So it's got direct flights with BA, so that makes it super easy, and then it's really connected across India. So if you're looking for sort of highlights of India, you're looking to Taj Mahal, the tigers, palaces of Rajasthan, beaches of Goa, the sleepy backwaters of Kerala, whatever it is that you want, you can combine that neatly with Hyderabad, and sort of start or finish the holiday in Hyderabad, and then do whatever it is you want across India. If you're wanting an adventure, if you're wanting the cricket itself to be part of the adventure, and to be that really kind of immersive experience, then Dharamsala is the one that we think is worth going to. So that's the fifth test. It's in the foothills of the Himalayas. I'm pretty sure it's the highest international stadium in the world. So you got stunning scenery. It's a slightly smaller city than some, so it's got a bit more kind of character. There's some fantastic walking nearby. It's actually a bit cooler up in the hills, so you don't get that kind of real kind of oppressive heat. And you've got some fascinating, rich Tibetan kind of culture. So that works really neatly, and you can combine that with Delhi. where you can fly into, again, easy direct flights, and make a bit of a kind of a tour of that, combining with, places like Amritsar or Shimla, or indeed going further into the Himalayas and doing some walking or trekking. So that's a kind of bit more of a sort of adventure, deep, real kind of experience.
That sounds awesome. So if someone's listening to this and they want to go to either Hyderabad or Dharamsala, what would you recommend them to do?
I mean, the best thing to do is just speak to us, give us a call. So, we've got a series of consultants here that know India really, really well. They know how to put it all together. And as I say, we're all about understanding what it is that you're looking for, and how to make that trip special for you. So the only way to do that is to have a chat on the phone. You can find us via experiencetravelgroup.com. Or even better, give us a call on 0203 993 5153.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Nick. The trip sounds amazing.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Yas. Thanks for having me.
Back to the 2023 World Cup. We've mentioned already that we might be a little bit worried about the gap between the top sides and the bottom sides. Joe, out of the 4 sides we've not really talked about so far, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Netherlands, who are you most excited about and think might be most capable of pulling off a few upsets?
I think it'll be fascinating to see how Afghanistan go, because it's their third 50-over World Cup, but it played in England, played in Australia and New Zealand, not really playing to their strengths really with their spin bowlers. So they've got Rashid Khan, Mujib, Mohammed Nabi still knocking about, and they've got the 18-year-old left-arm wrist spinner Noor Ahmed as well. So that is 4 good spin bowlers. If conditions do spin, and there's some debate around how much it will spin, but they're really, really well set up for these conditions, at least in theory. Rashid Khan took 6 wickets at 69 in the last World Cup. He obviously got smashed around by Owen Morgan. Yeah, I mean, he will probably average a quarter of that in this tournament based on his record in Asia, which is just phenomenal. But maybe even more interesting is what's happened with their batting, because their batting is what's traditionally let them down. I think they've only got 250 once in a World Cup in 15 games. No one's ever got 100 for Afghanistan in a World Cup. And now they've got 2 proper openers, 2 21-year-olds, Ramnullah Gurbaz and Ibrahim Zadran. Yes, still only 21, but have already formed a really good partnership. 5 of the top 8 ODI scores ever made by an Afghan batter have been made by one of these 2, and they've only just started out. Jonathan Trott's a big fan of Gurbaz in particular, and said, the longer he bats, the better chance we have of winning. He's already played in the IPL, smashed Rashid Khan around in an IPL game. I think had his most expensive spell ever against Gurbaz, who hit him for a bunch of 6s. So if the spinners do what they do in Asia, which they're absolutely brilliantly set up for, and these 2 come to the party as an opening pair, I'm not saying they're going to get to semi-finals because I don't think they've got the batting depth to do that, but I do think they should, because they lost 9 out of 9 in England last time. I think they should be winning at least 2, maybe 3 games, and there might be a really big upset in there as well. So I'm excited to see how they go.
Phil, we're talking down Sri Lanka, but they did just get to an Asia Cup final.
Yeah, absolutely. And they played some good stuff as well. Obviously, desperate implosion in the final itself, but before that, they beat Bangladesh a couple of times, turned over Pakistan in a thriller as well. Hasaranga is their star player. It's a massive loss for them. And as we said earlier, Chamira is probably the most complete seamer. Nonetheless, they have very watchable players. They've got 2 players at a similar kind of point in their careers in Mendis and Asalanka, both in their kind of mid to late 20s. Mendis is the more established player, but neither of them have really quite nailed their story yet in international cricket.
But have both had amazing moments.
Sure, exactly. But the question is whether it can all coalesce, really. Asalanka's an interesting player. He averages north of 40. Been in good form in particular through the Asia Cup. And up top as well, it's not especially explosive, but in Nissanka and Big Frank as well, they have 2 interesting, sort of solid old style opening bats. And if the tournament is going to be seam heavy, and it is going to swing with a bit of dew, and most games are floodlit, then it probably pays to have slightly more orthodox players up top. No doubt there are problems through their side, but as ever with Sri Lanka, there'll be some very watchable players, and they will have a say in the tournament. No one's put them in the last four, but they will have a say. One bowler to watch out for. You asked me on Sri Lanka, so I've been doing my research. Dilshan Madhushankar, who's a youngish left-arm seamer, who's just come into the side in recent times, but swings it miles. He's been talked up a lot by their coaches. He went for a lot of money in the Lankan Premier League, and he swings it. He's like a kind of mix between Vas and Bolt, but slightly slingier than Bolt. But he swings it at pace. He could have an interesting tournament. I don't think anyone sees that they're going to push hard in the final stages, but they will have their say. And as you say, they look like a kind of unified team now.
The other worry they've got is their skipper though. So Shanaka's like horribly out of form, averaging less than 10 over like the last 20 ODIs, and I think very nearly got sacked after the Asia Cup defeat. And it sounds like, reading between the lines, Chris Silverwood, who's their coach, basically saved him from the chop. I think they were preparing for an Alistair Cook style axing on the eve of the World Cup and have stuck with him. But when a player is primarily in the side for their batting and they can't buy a run, and their side's likely to be losing some games, it feels like I think this could go quite badly wrong for Sri Lanka. I hope I'm wrong, but it feels like, from what exactly as Phil's saying, they've got some really steady, good to watch batters. And you'd think with Hasaranga in their side, if you get up to 250, 260 is a real game on. Without Hasaranga, I think they could just get blown away.
Yeah, it's that point of difference at 6-7. So much of these tournaments these days are, you identify your game changer in that slot, and I'm not sure who that person is really.
And similar with Bangladesh, I know we talked about them a fair bit on last week's show with the whole Tamim Iqbal drama. Just short on firepower with the bat. They promoted Mehdi Hassan up the order, which has worked reasonably well so far. But he's someone who's basically never batted in the top order in his entire international career. But their bowling attack is probably the best they've had at a major tournament. They've got a good group of young quicks. Obviously, got Mustafa, Shoriful, and Taskin. So their attack is probably the best it's been, but batting is probably slightly weaker than it has been in years gone by. And then we've got the Netherlands as well, who've had an interesting build-up.
Where's your bucket hat?
Oh, look at this.
I've got my Netherlands bucket hat for the YouTube
just
audience.
too big.
It is way too big for me. But it's great. It's reversible as well, actually.
Yeah.
So
Is
you
it
can
not
make
a
it
one-size-fits-all scenario? Have you got an extra large?
I think I've just got a really small head.
Wear it mowing style.
What? Cut it up. Yeah.
I've never noticed you got a small head.
Yeah, I've got a really small head.
It's very much apparent now.
Yeah, it's very, very apparent. They've had an interesting week in that they were 36 for 9 at one point in a warm-up game. Again, I'm going to take it off. They were 36 for 9 at one point in a warm-up game against an Indian stateside. And then that was before their county cohort joined the squad. So Van der Merwe, Ackerman, De Leader, etc. And then they actually did okay in a warm-up game against Australia the other day, until Mitchell Stark blew them away, took a hat-trick with a new ball. But they did really well to contain them. So, I don't know. They qualified for the tournament ahead of West Indies, and they did so without several of their best players playing county cricket. So, Afghanistan didn't win a game in 2019. I think Netherlands would do pretty well to get one win. Obviously, massive overachievement just getting to the tournament in the first place. Very quickly, predictions for leading run scorers and leading wicket takers. Who wants to go first?
Jeez. I mean, it's just a mugs game, isn't it? Complete mugs game.
Babar Azam I mean, it's not very original. It's not very exciting, but I think he'll score the most runs.
Ditto Shubman Gill. Not very exciting, not very insightful. But I think he'll score the most runs. I had Travis Head in the magazine before he busted his hand up.
Yeah.
I always like a Devon Conway, don't I? A Devon Conway each way. In the batting, he's got runs, loads of runs out there in IPL. He's made runs in the warm-up games as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go for Rohit, I think.
Nice.
I'll go Warner.
It'd be good fun to watch.
Warner.
Insane.
World Cup experience, loads of experience in India. If the tournament's not quite as high scoring as well, I can see him having a good tournament.
Can he still see it?
I think so.
Okay.
He batted right-handed briefly against Ashwin last week, and that didn't work very well for him.
Didn't go so well.
What about wicket takers?
Harris Ralph, if he's fit, he did bowl a few overs the other day. He only bowled 4
Right.
and went the distance, by the way, but a couple of days ago. So they're clearly working him back, I imagine.
Okay.
Again, I had him in the magazine, but things change quick.
Mitchell Stark has got a ridiculous World Cup record and will continue to take loads of wickets. I think, I'm thinking new ball bowler. So Mitch Stark, Trent Bolt.
I was going to say Bolt as well. He looked so good in that England series, and as we've been recording this podcast,
So I reckon
he's been looking pretty
Reece
good as well.
Topley would be up there, but you just worry that he might not be able to play 2 games on the trot. So
It
so
feels
I'm
like
gonna
England are going to rotate their seamers a bit, doesn't
they'll
it?
have to, I think. I mean, Top, bless him, is kind of just every single time he looks like he's going to be in for something great happening, he falls over with for some reason or other. So I mean, again, a little bit dull, but Bumrah being back and rested and physically looking very strong, I reckon he might take a few new ball and death.
I reckon you're onto something there.
I reckon, yeah.
One to watch.
I just stuck my neck
If
out.
I was
I wanted to ask Kuldeep Yadav, right?
I was literally about to say.
Right, okay. We haven't planned this bit, have we, at all? No. But I saw some highlights from one of the Asia Cup games. He took 5 for 20 odd, and he took a 4 for there as well, I think. And he looks like he's bowling better than ever, and he's a very, very useful white ball bowler. In Test cricket, you can blunt him, left arm, wrist spin, and so on. But white ball cricket, when obviously the onus is on the batter, he's really, really effective, brilliant T20 bowler. Is he in their first 11?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Definitely.
He's number one.
So he's the number one
basically.
spinner now.
So it's
and they revolve around that.
Kuldeep, Jadeja will definitely play, and depending on conditions, it'll be Ashwin or Shardul basically to bat 8. So Ashwin, having basically not played ODI cricket for 4 years, is in the squad now because Axar Patel's injured.
So,
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what then. If you are saying where do you want to put your 20p, then Kuldeep Yadav will, by the sounds of it, play every game. He's really in form. He'll beat both sides of the bat. He'll be a threat to lefties as well as right.
And they'll bring him on as soon as the tail come in as well. I mean, it's an amazing story actually because he.
You're talking yourself into a bet here, aren't you?
It's already in, Joe. I've already sorted that one.
Because Kuldeep obviously was a big part of India's squad for a few years, and then he completely went off the scene. So he wasn't even getting into his IPL side a couple of years ago, and then he's come back and he's now, as Phil says, as good as he's ever been, if not better.
Can I ask a question to anyone really? How's Joe Root going to go? Right, he's played very little 50-over cricket. No one has. He gave an interview a couple of days ago. I forget to whom actually, but saying 2019 worst I've ever played, still haunts me. Got to get that one behind me.
The final,
in the final, the Grand Home spell, as Mark alluded to. How is Joe going to go? Because it seems to me he's quite key to England's chances here, right?
I think he'll go fine. I think the bit of a come down, sort of like post Ashes and whatever, which I think hit a lot of the guys that were involved in both. Didn't seem to be able to kind of raise himself to any sort of form whatsoever. But that will be exactly this. He's so experienced. That'll be exactly the sort of spur to kind of get him back to his very best. Yeah. Conditions that last time he was in India, he was outstanding, wasn't he? Making the double 100 in the test in Chennai.
He's got a really good 50-over record in India
as well. Fantastic 50-over record in India. Okay. I think he'll be absolutely fine.
I think I agree. He's played so little ODI cricket. I just don't think it'll take him that long to get back into it. He was exposed. Yeah, I guess the worrying thing was in that ODI at Lords, because he got dropped a few times. You saw just how out of nick he was, but Root just so rarely looks out of nick for any sort of prolonged spell.
Well, this is what I was going to say. So, say England gets to the final, they'll play 11 games. Even if they get to a semi, 10 games. So how many times has Root had a 10-game streak of being out of form in ODI cricket? It just doesn't really happen. So even in 3 games later, he's still not back to his best. I think by the time we reach the business end of the tournament, he will be. So yeah, I'm not not overly worried.
The thing is, with somebody of his age and his experience and whatever, you kind of need that little bit of extra something to pull the best out of yourself. You know, it's not as though he would have gone out of his way not to try during the New Zealand series or anything like that. It's just kind of there's nothing there to kind of get the juices flowing. And World Cup in India, probably most definitely his last, will be exactly the occasion to kind of pull the best out of him. And because he doesn't, because it's 50-over cricket and because he can kind of give himself a little bit of time to get in, I don't think it'll be long before Joe's stroking them around nicely.
And he doesn't get to play the T20 stuff, so he'll have watched these T20 World Cups. I mean, that would have been, he'd have been delighted for his teammates, but it would have been quite hard watching, I imagine. An England World Cup win, which you're not part of, over the winter, it'll be desperate for this.
Are you ready to take your cricket club to the next level? Look no further than Total Play, the cricket pitch experts. Picture this: a high-performance, low-maintenance cricket facility that helps attract and retain new members, all while capitalising on the sport's surging popularity, especially among women and girls. Their state-of-the-art non-turf cricket pitches and practice facilities carry ECB approval and have given clubs of all sizes the space to grow their game. From village clubs to first-class grounds, they bring vision to reality and will be there to support you on every step of the journey. So why wait? Elevate your club's game with Total Play. Visit their website or call them today to transform your cricketing dreams into a winning reality. Couple of bits of news from elsewhere. So, number one, Middlesex had their relegation to Division 2 confirmed after just ending up on the wrong side of a very close game against Notts last week. Sam Robson was nearly the hero, scoring 100 and taking a forfeit as Notts ended up winning by 2 wickets. We were talking about it before we started recording. Just 2 batting bonus points all year before the last game of the season. Just 2 players, Robson and Higgins, averaging more than 30 with the bat all season. Quite hard to stay up if that's your batting output. And Phil, today, Hayley and Matthews played one of the great T20I knocks. West Indies chased down 213 against Australia. Matthews and Stefani Taylor were the only 2 West Indies players to pass 5. Matthews hit 132 off 64. Just a brilliant player.
99 not out as well a few days back. So against the best team that's ever walked the earth, it's a pretty good effort. She's amazing to watch. She's the female batter that gives her and Harman give me the most joy to watch, because there's a real orthodoxy behind, alongside the flamboyance, and she's an absolute megastar now. Really, I guess the one slight caveat is that stat, her and Stephanie, tells its own story, with no dotting in the side anymore, as that kind of peculiar standoff between West Indies board and her continues. There's great talent, and then there's a big gap underneath, and it's just as you see it with the men's side, perhaps there's a sort of bubbling under concern there with the women's side. But look, just to watch her on her day, I was saying it to you and Katya, a few months back. She's the best to watch for me. She's absolutely stunning.
Well, that is everything for today's show. Cheers, Butch. Cheers, Joe. Cheers, Phil. We will be back in 3 days' time for the first of our 42 World Cup daily episodes throughout the World Cup.